What defines victory and defeat in this war is whether or not, after those territory losses, Ukraine ends up in the Western sphere of influence with Western economic and security guarantees, or in the Russian sphere under pro-Russian leadership. Now, that outcome is not decided yet, and that is what ultimately will define, is it Ukraine and the West, which have come out on top here, or is it Russia? And it is that outcome, not the loss of Eastern territories or perhaps Crimea, which will define victory here.
American and British missiles have been used by Ukraine against Russia in Russia. Russia threatened nuclear retaliation, as they've done periodically over the last 2 or 3 years, and America has given Ukraine anti-personnel mines. What difference will this make to the 1,000-day-long war? Well, let's speak to someone who we always turn to for expertise in this area. Anthony Loyd, he's the Times war correspondent, has been to Ukraine on many occasions. Anthony, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Is this too little too late, I suppose, what critics of how the West has armed Ukraine might think?
It may be too little too late, or it may just succeed in strengthening Ukraine's very weak hand at the moment in holding back the Russian offensives all along its eastern lines and in the Kursk salient, in order to give it a slightly stronger negotiating position after the inauguration of Trump in January. It remains to be seen. But just to go back to the use of Storm Shadows and ATACMs, which we've seen use Storm Shadows yesterday and ATACMs the day before. This morning, there's now reports that Russia has indeed escalated and fired potentially an intercontinental ballistic missile into Ukraine. That's a far bigger missile with a far longer range from Russia, accompanied by apparently 7 cruise missiles, 6 of which were shot down. It's these very early reports coming out from Ukraine. That is not a nuclear warhead, may I say. That's got a nuclear capability, but that's a much bigger missile type used for the first time by Russia into Ukraine. So we are in a period of significant escalation at the moment, which started, may I add, with, of course, Russia's invasion of Ukraine and more recently its deployment of North Korean troops there. But to go back to your question, is it too little too late? For Storm Shadow and ATACMs to work, they have to be part of a strategy. Killing Russians and killing North Koreans is not a strategy in itself. It's a tactic, and without a strategy, as Sun Tzu said 2,000 years ago, tactics without strategy are the noise before defeat. So what can we see as the strategy for the use of Storm Shadow and ATACMs? Well, really, the strategy, if it works, will be to secure Ukraine's defense lines against further losses ahead of huge pressure that the Ukrainians will come under to negotiate a settlement to the war next year after Trump is inaugurated as president. So that, so far as can be seen, is a strategy. But it comes at a very, complicated time for Ukraine. Trump's about to come in. Yeah. Ukraine's losing a huge amount of men. Russia is too, but Russia's got more men than Ukraine. So it might work or it might not. The risks, of course, are that it establishes a pattern of escalation, which was started by Russia, at a time when Ukraine is weak, and the whole picture will change in January.
And Anthony, that's the point, isn't it? That we hear a lot from Ukrainians about winning the war. But from what you're saying there, whatever Trump does, and we can never take him at his word, and but he's clearly not going to be a big supporter of Ukraine. We had James Heapy on earlier saying that the West could absolutely go to a war footing and give Ukraine all the armaments and support it needs for the next 3 years, and eventually that would drive Russia out of Ukraine. That is not going to happen. So the aim of the game is no longer a Ukrainian victory. We've just got to be honest about that, do we?
Yeah, I think we've got to be very clear as to what we define victory. And victory of a sort still could occur. But let's face it, Ukraine is very, very unlikely to get back Crimea, which it lost in 2014. It's very unlikely, I would say impossible, for it to get back Donetsk, Luhansk, or perhaps the slices of Kherson and Zaporizhia that it's lost since the full-scale invasion. This war will, I would argue very strongly, end with Ukraine having to cede territory that it has lost to Russia. However, that ultimately will not define victory in this war. What defines victory and defeat in this war is whether or not after those territory losses, Ukraine ends up in the Western sphere of influence with Western economic and security guarantees, or in the Russian sphere under pro-Russian leadership. Now, that outcome is not decided yet, and that is what ultimately will define, is it Ukraine and the West, which have come out on top here, or is it Russia? And it is that outcome, not the loss of Eastern territories or perhaps Crimea, which will define victory here.
Is there a sense that the state of play has changed in the conflict now that Ukraine has these missiles?
First of all, I wanted to correct you because at the moment we do not. So this number 12, apparently 12 missiles that were fired from Ukraine, the Storm Shadow missiles, it's only mentioned by the pro-Russian channels, pro-Russian, social media channels. We cannot rely on this information precisely because Ukrainian Ministry of Defense, Rustem Umerov, he didn't confirm their usage. So, and as you know, we prefer not to talk about it when it's not confirmed. But as for, let's say, hypothetically, Ukraine started using Storm Shadow and ATACMs, again, it's very hard to say right now. I personally don't think that it would change the course of war, instantly, because the situation, let's say, on the front line in Donetsk region, in Kharkiv, in Kherson, is quite grim. So, for example, the Russians still slowly, but they're still advancing in the south of Donetsk region. I'm talking about such settlements as Kurakhova, Pokrovsk. The forced evacuation is still ongoing. The forced evacuation just started by the regional authorities in August. So there are still people and there are still civilians and children included living in these areas, like up to 200 children live in the areas in this, like, in the towns where the basically intense fighting is still happening.
Yeah.
So it's hard to tell right now how it will, whether it will be effective or not. If we speculate and say that Ukraine started using these missiles, Storm Shadow missiles, I assume there should be some time pass when they will be in much, when the practice, when the experience will come up. What I do understand that all this news is circulating for the past 2 days. We see quite a lot of information, including the threats from the Russian side about the potential use of nukes. So a lot of things are changing. A lot of things, like, it's very fast to process it. But again, we will see what will happen.
Yeah, I mean, it's been for over a year that Ukraine was sort of pleading for permission to strike beyond the border. And that was a plea being made to the UK and to the US. What does it mean for President Zelensky to now have this approval? Because also time, it feels, may be particularly pressured because we've got Trump coming into the White House in January.
Rosie, our Ukrainian leadership have been asking for this weapon for a long time, and if this weapon would come up much earlier, we wouldn't have lost so big strongholds like Bakhmut, Avdiivka. The situation wouldn't be so difficult near Chasiv Yar and Pokrovsk, really big Ukrainian settlements, big towns. So we wouldn't have lost them. As for the situation, political situation, there are thoughts in and around Ukrainian establishment that Trump presidency wouldn't be bad actually for Ukraine. The head of the head of the office of the president, Andriy Yermak, is planning his visit to the US, and he has some ties with Trump's surrounding encirclement, because Yermak is a good administrator, and even the meeting between Zelensky and Trump that happened in the end of September happened because of the connections of Trump with because of the connection of Yermak with Trump surrounding. So there are rumors that the rumors and speculation that the presidency won't be bad at all. So it's hard to tell because he's unpredictable, you know. Trump is unpredictable, so it's hard to tell right now.